Adobe Acrobat Studio, so brand new. Show me all the things PDFs can do. Do your work with ease and speed. PDF Spaces is all you need. Do hours of research in an instant with key insights from an AI assistant. Pick a template with a click. Now your prezzo looks super slick. Close that deal? Yeah, you won. Do that, doing that, did that, done. Now you can do that with Acrobat. Now you can do that with the all-new Acrobat. It's time to do your best work with the all-new Adobe Acrobat Studio.
Hello friends, Justin here. Before we leap into today's episode, and as 2026 arrives, I want to thank you for listening to the show. It's been an amazing past year for my work through Think Faith, with millions of downloads, views and engagement across our podcast, videos and live events. We've reached hundreds of thousands of people with Thinking Faith. Heather, a show listener, got in touch to say your content has contributed to me coming back to Christ. My atheist husband is now interested in learning more too. But we really are just getting going. We've a brand new show, Uncommon Ground, coming soon in the new year. But as our work expands, so does the cost of producing good quality resources that encourage both believers and skeptics to engage a thinking faith. That's why I'd like to ask you to consider supporting my work with a year-end gift or by becoming a monthly supporter. Every gift makes a great difference to my work continuing strong in 2026. To support, go to the link with today's show or visit justinbrierley.com/support. Thanks for listening and Happy New Year.
It is an honour to stand here in this empty chamber to speak about the original purpose of this space, which was a chapel in the Church of England.
This is parliamentarian Danny Kruger, MBE, delivering a speech in the summer to a largely empty House of Commons.
The old chamber of the House of Commons, on which this space is modelled after the Great Fire of 1834, was St Stephen's Chapel, formerly a royal church, given by the heirs of Henry VIII to Parliament to serve as its debating chamber. And Madam Deputy Speaker, your chair stands on the altar steps, and the table with the dispatch boxes is where the lectern stood. And I mention this because the link between this place and the Church of England isn't merely ceremonial. The prayers we say here at the start of every day aren't just a nod to tradition. Our democracy is founded on Christian faith.
The speech, in which Kruger describes the Christian foundation of the British Parliament and the country as a whole, went viral online soon after it was posted. I sat down with Kruger to ask him about the reaction it received. Were you surprised by just how much attention it got online?
I was, yes. I was very pleased, and I'd anticipated it would get picked up because it's a message that I think is of the moment. I mean, it's an eternal message, but it has resonance today. And I thought I was speaking into a receptive space. But yes, it did seem to go big online. It didn't go very big in the chamber. No one came to hear it.
I mean, I think one of the things about the video that makes it stand out is the fact you're addressing this empty House of Commons. Now, it's not necessarily that unusual for speeches to be made to largely empty Houses of Commons. That's just the nature of Commons coming and going, the business of the day and so on. But I suppose there was something about the symbolism of that, at least, that struck people, would you say?
But yeah, an empty chamber, I think it does represent the state we're in. You have a House of Commons that is fundamentally, overwhelmingly uninterested, either in our institutions and their Christian heritage, or in the work that needs to be done to restore the proper sort of social, moral, cultural basis of our society. These are topics that just don't get regarded as appropriate for political debate at the moment.
Over the past year, Kruger has been a staunch opponent of proposed legislation for euthanasia and late-term abortion. His speech came in the context of significant votes by Parliament in favour of both.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last month, in the space of 3 days in one infamous week, this House authorised the killing of unborn children, of 9-month-old babies, and it passed a bill to allow the killing of the elderly and disabled. And I describe those laws in these stark terms not to provoke further controversy, but because those are the facts. We gave our consent to the greatest crime, the killing of the weak, the most defenceless human beings. It was a great sin. And if I, standing here, have any power to repent on behalf of this House, then I hereby repent of what we did. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the reaction to these votes, and all around us, in reaction to the state of the country and the world, something else is happening. There is a great hunger in society for a better way of living. And I want to use this opportunity to explain what that better way is, and why we here in England have the means to follow it.
So, yeah, in the course of 3 days, we essentially passed a death sentence on the most vulnerable people at the beginning and end of life. I regarded that as a terrible, terrible moment, one completely inconsistent with the traditions of our country, indeed the traditions of Parliament, which exists to pass laws to protect the most vulnerable. In a sense, that's the foundation of our politics we have. We are a Christian nation that regards power as existing in order to preserve both peace but also protect the vulnerable from the abuse of power. That's how democracy has sort of interpreted the Christian gospel, in my view.
The MP went on to make the case for why British democracy and rule of law was founded on Christian principles.
This nation, England, from which the United Kingdom grew, uniquely among the nations of the world, was founded, created consciously on the basis of the Bible and the story of the Hebrew people. And in that sense, England is the oldest Christian country and the prototype of nations across the West. The story of England is the story of Christianity operating on a people to make the institutions and the culture that have been uniquely stable, uniquely successful. The Western model was forged and refined in England over 1,000 years, from the 9th to the 19th centuries. So what is that model? It's simply this: that power should arrange itself for the benefit of all the people under it, and specifically for the poorest and weakest. That the law is there to protect the ordinary person against the abuse of power. That every individual has equal dignity and freedom, including crucially the freedom of conscience, of religion and belief, making space for other religions under the Christian shield, a secular space, indeed itself a Christian concept, meaningful only in a Christian world. These are ideas that only make sense if you accept that we have some intrinsic value, a value that is given to us, not of our own making or invention.
Kruger's speech went on to describe how, as Christianity receded during the 20th century in the face of a rising atheistic liberalism, it opened the door to the increasing influence of other religions and progressive so-called woke ideologies that have reshaped Britain. Now, in a country unsure of its identity and wandering towards moral calamity, this was the time, Kruger argued, for a re-embrace of the foundational story of Christian faith and its values. But after the speech was widely shared, some Christians feared that Kruger was playing into a religiously motivated far-right narrative.
In the speech itself, you voiced discomfort about the rise of Islam, as one of those religions coming to replace Christianity. You also talked about woke, but that doesn't do justice to its seriousness, you said. Ancient paganism, Christian heresies, the cult of modernism, all mashed up into a dangerous ideology of power. Now, there are those who are concerned, though, that it's precisely that kind of speech that adds fuel to the fire of this growing connection in some circles between the far right and Christianity. Tommy Robinson shares your concerns about the rise of Islam and has declared himself a Christian recently. He's talked about England being a Christian nation. So Christian nationalism is on the rise. Do you have concerns about that, about your speech sort of being basically seen as, well, you're now in that camp, as it were?
Yeah, but I mean, what's true is true, and if people of good faith, as it were, of goodwill, aren't prepared to say what's true, then people of bad faith, bad and ill will do so. So I'm not going to be scared off saying this just because some unsavoury characters are saying similar things. And it's really important that, I think this is why, without getting into secular politics, this is why conservatism is in such trouble. It's because we've fought shy of saying true things, and we've been discredited in the process. So I think we've got to be bold and confident, but decent, civil, respectful, never triumphalist, never supremacist in the sense of thinking that we have all the answers, or certainly not any suggestion that Christians have more value than people of other faiths. I mean, that's a totally un-Christian idea.
My interview with Kruger was recorded at the end of a summer in which many St George's flags had been displayed in public by protesters concerned about immigration, and which culminated in far-right activist Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom rally in London. Among the hundreds of thousands protesting, there were Christian crosses on display and preachers who addressed the crowds.
This nation is blessed. This people is blessed. And as we hold them Christian crosses in the air, as we hold them Christian flags in the air, we tell every demonic spirit, we tell every demon and devil, you will not take this country, you will not take this people.
Our interview was recorded before the demonstration took place, but I asked Kruger whether he was concerned that his call to re-embrace Christian faith in the UK may be heard as a call to Christian nationalism.
In terms of Christian nationalism, I do see a danger if as it were, genuine Christians won't stand up for their faith and for our country, and I worry about I think cultural Christianity is a good thing. I think it is good to have a Christian culture. I think if it becomes unmoored from actual Christianity, from the practice of the faith, and I am suspicious of people who bang on about, Christian nation, wave the flag, if actually they only use it as a cultural marker. I think that is a legitimate concern. Nevertheless, I think in this such spate we've had over the summer of flag raising, which has been a more overtly nationalistic thing. It's about identity as a country rather than it being a Christian country, but obviously there is a cross on the St George's flag. I think, I don't want to condemn those people either for trying to reach for some sense of our country as being more than just, as we say, more than a hotel or a sort of transit lounge, or a sort of destination for migration. It's a place that has meaning, and I think if you really drill down to what people meant by that, they would say, well, the meaning of our country is partly historic and relational. It's the sense that our ancestors were born here and made this country that we are the beneficiaries of. So there's a sense of kind of historic continuity, which I think is legitimate. But there is a reaction going on to the culture of the establishment, which I welcome. And at its heart, I think there is a deep yearning among people for a moral meaning to our lives, which they felt that our country represented and institutionalized until quite recently. And they want that country back.
You can watch my full interview with Danny Kruger about his speech at the link with today's show. I've chosen to begin this final episode of Season 2 of this podcast with it because that viral speech was yet another example from the past year of the way the conversation on faith and culture has shifted dramatically. Kruger's sentiments reflect those of many who sense that atheist materialism has failed to deliver anything meaningful in the place of the Christian faith that once shaped the West. And he, like many, fears for what the new ideologies and religions are creating in its place, but also hopes that a renewal of Christian faith may yet be the result. But if a tide of interest in Christian faith is coming back in, there are also difficult questions about what it's bringing in its wake. Far-right Christian-infused rhetoric, but that has little time for the scriptural mandate to care for the refugee and the foreigner. A desire for a strong-armed form of traditional faith which enforces Christian values, but without Christ and his love and grace at the centre. Or could the new interest in Christian identity, even if misappropriated for political ends, still see people finding the real thing? Since his speech last summer, Kruger himself has left the Conservatives to join forces with Nigel Farage's Reform Party, another sign of the fast-moving cultural currents at play as a vibe shift in politics and religion continues to unfold. Today, in our season finale, we'll be taking stock of what the surprising rebirth looks like as we enter 2026, and we return to the question we began this season with: is the rebirth right-wing? And 2 years on from when I began this podcast, making claims of a turning of the spiritual tide, I'll also be asking some hard questions about whether these statistics themselves are pointing towards a renewal of Christian faith in the UK and beyond. I'm Justin Brierley, and in this podcast series, I'm bringing you the inside account of why a meaning crisis in the modern world and the search for a better story about life are leading many 21st century people to reconsider Christian faith. Welcome back to the surprising rebirth of belief in God, Season 2, Episode 30. Is the rebirth real?
Looking for ways to keep the kids entertained while traveling? Netflix Games lets them jump into fun, creative adventures at no extra cost. Everything's unlocked with your Netflix membership. From Paw Patrol Academy and Lego Duplo World to Barbie color creations and World of Peppa Pig, there's something for every little explorer. And you don't need Wi-Fi. Kids can play anytime, anywhere. Visit netflixfamily.com/travel tips for all your kids' holiday entertainment.
Enter Justin Brierley, the guy who tried so hard to appear unbiased on his unbelievable show, doing something very similar. He's written a new book called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God.
This is Mr. Deity, an atheist YouTuber taking aim at my surprising rebirth thesis following the publication of my book.
And then confessed in yet another public forum that he has no data to back up this bald-faced, unwarranted assertion at the very heart of his thesis.
I can't back that up.
It's because there are no statistics which confirm the thesis of his book. There is no surprising rebirth of belief in God.
Ouch! But Mr. Deity wasn't the only one questioning my claim that faith was on the rebound in the West.
So what is it that's actually emerging here? What is it that's changing? What is this sort of shift in the air?
This is another atheist YouTuber and friend of the show, Alex O'Connor, giving a slightly less snarky but no less forthright critique of my thesis on stage at an event we shared in Edinburgh in 2024.
We know it's not a belief in God, at least not based on our most recent statistics. We can look at the census, as Justin well knows. The last census in this country showed that for the first time, famously, Christianity is now makes up the minority of our population. And it's possible that in 10 years' time we'll see that sort of reverse and start going up again. I can't say that's not possible, but to say that we have any statistical direction here that Christianity is making a comeback, I think is ungrounded.
Of course, Alex and Mr. Deity were both correct. When I published my book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, and began this podcast of the same name in the autumn of 2023, my case that the tide of faith was beginning to turn was based more on a hunch than any statistical evidence.
And are there any stats, if we're going to have a kind of reason?
This is the thing, and the only stats I quote in the book are the ones that are contrary to my thesis.
I had merely sensed and begun to chart a change in the intellectual atmosphere, a new openness among secular thinkers to taking the God question seriously, an increasing appreciation of the value of faith to culture, and even some surprising converts to Christianity. However, the only statistics I quoted in my book were the same as those referenced by my friendly critic Alex. At the last UK census, less than half the country describing itself as Christian for the first time, and only a tiny proportion of those actually attending church. Skeptics, quite rightly, objected. You have some interesting anecdotes, Justin, but no hard evidence of any rebirth at the ground level. But then, all sorts of things started to happen.
The main headline, which I think
has really become our kind of message to the church in the last year is, would you go to church if a friend invited you?
This is Roscoe Crawley of the UK campus ministry Fusion.
We found out that 74% of non-Christian students said yes to that question, which was far beyond what anyone thought it was going to be, and it was so encouraging.
When Fusion surveyed students on university campuses in 2024 and saw a huge leap in the numbers seemingly open to faith and church, Roscoe Crawley was one of the first people who told me, "Your Surprising Rebirth thesis, Justin, I think we're starting to see it happen on the ground among young people." But it was far from the only data point emerging about Gen Z. Earlier in the year, a listener had sent me an article about surprising statistics emerging out of Finland, which showed a more than doubling of young men in churches between 2011 to 2019. This was followed up by further research showing the percentage of young male confirmands believing in God in Finland nearly doubled from around 1/3 to almost 2/3 between 2019 and 2024. Other Nordic countries followed suit, with reports of an uptick in church attendance among young men in both Sweden and Norway. Then came news of an Eastern Orthodox boom.
Everyone is saying this is more than they've ever seen before, and they're saying that this has picked up just in the past few years.
Father Andrew Damick was one of many Orthodox priests in the USA, saying that reports of parishes being flooded with new converts was backed up by data.
In this study, the increase of people who have been baptized or chrismated from 21 to 23 versus the previous 3 years, 2018 to 2020, there was a 62% increase.
It wasn't long before Catholics in mainland Europe and elsewhere were saying similar things.
France, 2024, adult baptism this year rose to 7,135. Both graphs showed an upward trajectory in the number of baptism for each year.
A spike in adult baptisms in 2024 was met by a further spike in 2025, the largest number of yearly adult converts to Catholicism in France in living memory.
Who were the converts? It was driven mostly by young people under the age of 25. 45% increase among adults compared to last year, 33% rise among adolescents. So you're seeing a big drive here from young people.
And it wasn't only Catholics on the increase in France.
Something is happening in this country. Evangelical churches are popping up everywhere. Leaders say there's a new church opening every 10 days, and they're attracting more and more young people.
And then there were the Bible sales.
A bit of good news was reported in the Times this week when they said Bible sales are increasing. In fact, they're up 87% between 2019 and 2024, when sales of books in general are going down. And this seems to be mainly driven by young people, because the book that's selling has gone up the most is the Good News Bible Youth Edition, which is the most popular version being purchased at the moment.
In fact, Bible sales were seeing a dramatic uptick in both the USA and the UK. On top of all this news of new converts and Bible sales in Europe and the USA came a YouGov survey showing belief in God among young people rising from 22% to 45%, while a Major Times survey on Gen Z pointed to a new religious openness among young people. Around 80% identified as spiritual, compared to older groups like Boomers and Gen X, and they were half as likely to be atheists as their parents. Sociologists began to call Gen Z the open generation. Across all these statistics was a common theme. Young people, especially young men, seemed to be taking faith seriously again. In the wake of all these Gen Z headlines, researcher Peter Dray began traveling the world to talk to students directly on behalf of international student ministry IFES. They recently released the findings in a new report. I sat down with Peter to find out more.
Tell us what you found. Maybe what are some of the key distinctives about Gen Z that your report revealed?
Yeah, so I guess that we
various things that would play out. One is that they would see themselves as a very diverse generation. They'd see that in all sorts of ways, but partly this is because of demographic trends that are showing themselves in lots of countries, immigration. It means that they think a lot about identity, about their own ethnic identity, national identity, cultural identity. Around the world, I think many from Gen Z would see themselves as having more in common with other Gen Z, perhaps from very different parts of the world than they would with people from other generations within their own nation. And part of that is to do with technological change, and particularly in countries where Gen Z are maybe the first generation to be on the internet in large number. That's hugely affected their outlook. Something that really surprised me is just how much they value well-being and health, particularly mental health, including in parts of the world where mental health concerns wouldn't have been very strongly felt until perhaps a few years ago. And then they are also open to a really wide range of forms of religions and spiritualities, really good proportion are willing to explore traditions and faiths from outside of their own. And in some places, they're willing to look for help, truth, experience almost anywhere.
Why are they so open? They have been described as the open generation, Gen Z. And what does that openness look like in practice?
Yeah, that's a complex question. Part of it is to do with the movement of people. So because of migration, but also urbanization, Gen Z are reckoned to be the most urban generation in history, which just means they are constantly rubbing shoulders with people who aren't like them. Ghettos still exist, but it is much easier to meet people who are just different from you, not just online, but also in person. And that is causing a lot of Gen Z to reevaluate their fundamental ways of seeing the world. You know, that has been associated, as you have written very widely here in the UK, with the collapse of atheism, a little memory of religious violence in many parts of the world, strong awareness of mental illness, and a kind of suspicion maybe that the traditional ways of dealing with mental illness don't quite cut it. So together, all of those things are making Gen Z much more willing to feel, and I think to voice a lot of deep personal existential questions. And they may well say that my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, don't have the monopoly on truth in those questions. And so therefore they're much more willing to entertain perhaps alongside those traditional religions that they've been raised up in, answers from elsewhere. And I guess what that means in places in which, you know, agnosticism, atheism had been the order of the day. I've met many students who said, I was brought up atheist or agnostic, particularly students here in Europe, but who were willing to say, I've just experienced things and I'm asking questions that I realise materialism doesn't have a satisfying answer to. So it doesn't mean they're only open to Jesus and Christianity. You know, they may be open to from everything from, I don't know, tarot to Taoism, but they are also willing to give Christianity a hearing within that.
You can read the full report, Gen Z Insights for Global Student Ministry, at ifesworld.org. In previous episodes of this season, we've explored why the turn towards Christian faith is being felt especially among young people and young men in particular. And one particular UK report, released shortly before Easter this year, seemed to offer the most definitive proof yet that the tide of faith was turning.
Is there a quiet revival happening among us? I've been reading through this new survey some of you will have heard about that is documenting an increase in church attendance in the UK, especially among the younger generations, especially among Gen Z.
Religious leaders say Gen Z or Gen Z is reversing a trend of religious decline that's been seen across the West for decades.
Slowly, slightly, faith is trickling back, at least into Britain. The pews are filling up, notably with young people. Gen Z's attendance at church has quadrupled in recent years.
Only the Brits could come up with a title like that, the Quiet Revival. How very British.
Now, as you're probably aware, I host a podcast called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. But in March this year, when I was given an early preview of the Quiet Revival report from Bible Society in the UK, even I was shocked at the headline results. In 2018, the Bible Society had undertaken a major survey on religion in England and Wales using YouGov, a widely used and trusted polling organisation. The results on questions such as church-going and religiosity provided a familiar narrative of generational decline. Only 8% of people said they attended church regularly, and among young people, this fell to less than 4%. But when Bible Society repeated the same YouGov survey 6 years later, in 2024, they were confronted by a very different set of results. The overall percentage of people saying they went to church regularly had leapt up to 12%, a rise of over half. Not all age demographics had risen. There's a U-shape to the graph showing a decline in church-going among the middle-aged, 45 to 64-year-olds, but which bounces back again for over 65s. But it was on the youngest end of the spectrum that the change was most notable. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, the numbers saying they were attending church rose from 4% in 2018 to 16% in 2024. And the change among young men specifically was even more dramatic. 21% now said they went to church at least once a month. This seemed to be, on the face of it, a stunning statistical vindication of my thesis that a rebirth of belief in God was underway. Even my old sparring partner, Alex O'Connor, seemed impressed.
Was it the Bible Society that just released a study about young people, incredible increase of people? And it wasn't, I think the thing that surprised me was not just that people were beginning to believe in God again or something, but to attend church.
Yes.
Which is quite a thing in itself. I mean, I agree with people like Justin Brierley when they say that, I don't know if the statistics bear this out, but I can kind of feel something in the air, like the conversation's shifting a little bit.
Yes.
If church attendance is going up, I think that's quite an important indicator.
The Quiet Revival report has inevitably become a major talking point in UK Christian circles and the wider media too. But there's also been some significant pushback from critics. Some 9 months on from the release of the report, in what has been a whirlwind year for her and her colleagues, I sat down with co-author Rhiannon McAleer, Director of Research and Impact at Bible Society, to talk about how the Quiet Revival had been received.
It's been received with so much enthusiasm, far more than I could have anticipated or imagined. And I think one of the most remarkable things for me and for Rob, who's the other author, as well as the wider Bible Society team, as we go out and about and we talk to people, is that it's really resonated. And that's been something that's come back really strongly, is just a sense of this isn't just a good news story that made everyone feel a bit hopeful, but it was happening to other people. Very much a sense of this is what we've been seeing, but we thought it was just us. And I think one of the interesting things about the report, it was a kind of a catalytic moment for the church to join up its stories and kind of almost gave it permission to tell a new story about the place of Christianity today, which I think is so interesting and fascinating. Of course, not everyone's been experiencing it, and that's absolutely fine. But overwhelmingly, it's been really positive that the general things we observe around more young people just turning up, young men, especially something going on with them, it seems to be what's reflected on the ground to a greater or lesser extent. And it's been really interesting seeing people kind of internally process that. Like at first I thought your report was rubbish, and then I thought about it. And yeah, we have baptized more young people in the last 2 years than we had in the previous, 5 or 6. So yeah, really, really encouraging. And as a researcher, that's great. We've got so much data to work with going forward.
Okay, so what about the fact there have obviously been critical responses in the media, people who are questioning the quality of the data, whether this stacks up in reality? How have you sought to respond to those kinds of critiques over the past year?
Having been told for many years that people don't care about the difference between probability and non-probability sampling, or whether I put disagree on the left or right of my scales, it turns out people do care. So that's quite fun. But so I think it depends on the difference, the type of the critique. And there are many critiques that come in real good faith. There are those who say, it's possible something's happening. Just don't believe the scale that your data indicates. I would say most of our critics fall in that space. So it's kind of either cautious optimism or cooler skepticism, but very, very few people are saying nothing is happening. We've never claimed our data set is the final word. It's just one piece of an emerging puzzle. And we've never claimed or made statements around that this is the end of secularization or anything like that. In fact, the report points to the opposite. We say that we don't know how long this will last for, whether it's a blip in the long process of secularization, or the start of something new, but it is a moment. And as Bible Society, we want people to grab that moment. I would say, though, there are some critiques which feel in less good faith. It's quite interesting to observe when people want to support it, they say this is YouGov data. When people want to bring it down, they say it's Bible Society data. And there are various questionings of our motives. The idea that because Bible Society is a religious organization, we somehow lose our objectivity when looking at data. But to that, no one is completely objective. Even our critics, they're coming from a background and they bring their personal interpretation onto the data in the same way that all researchers do. Equally, Bible Society's mission is not church growth. It's kind of ultimately, this is an interesting story, but the reason we chose to tell it is because our mission is getting the Bible out there. We want churches to be able to respond to this missional moment well, both meeting the new people coming, but also reaching that wider spiritual openness. So people bring their own suppositions on your motivations, which is definitely a new one for me. But I'm confident that it was the right thing to do, to release the data and start this amazing conversation, and I'm really glad we did.
Now, I have sometimes, probably credibly, been accused of being too much of an optimist when it comes to the way I see Christian faith bouncing back in the West. So, in the spirit of a forthright conversation, I wanted to hear the other side of this debate, and I knew just the person to provide a dash of cold water to claims of a quiet revival in the UK.
The overall trend has been away from religious identity, belief and practice. We've been in a long period of secularization going back at least a century.
This is social scientist and statistician David Voas, whose research has long charted the growing secularization of the UK and the West in general. A widely shared article he wrote for the academic journal The Conversation critiqued the findings of the Quiet Revival. I asked David to walk me through each of his main objections in turn so that I could put them to Rhiannon.
Firstly, one of the points you make is that the Quiet Revival data showing this uptick seems to be at odds with the British Social Attitude Survey on church-going and religious affiliation. Just talk us through what the differences are there.
Yes, so the Bible Society's report makes a number of really quite startling claims, but let me just pick out the three key ones. First being that church-going overall has gone up by more than half since 2018. Next, that Catholic attendance specifically has more than doubled since 2018. And then thirdly, that young men's attendance has increased 5 times since 2018. So none of these claims is supported by what I think of as good survey research. If we believe the British Social Attitudes Survey, which is widely regarded as being the most reliable source of data on these issues, the figure for 2018 that the Bible Society survey gave them was actually too low. So they were suggesting that 8% of the population of England and Wales in 2018 were Christian churchgoers, and then that went up to 12% in 2024. So that's an increase of at least half, actually. In precise terms, they said it was 56% increase. Well, the BSA, British Social Attitudes Survey figures are actually pretty much the reverse of that. They gave a value of 12.2% in 2018 and 8.7% in 2024. So a very substantial decline over the pre and post-pandemic period. There's been no jump in young men's attendance, according to these national surveys.
I asked Rhiannon how she responds to the quiet revival research being at odds with the British Social Attitudes Survey results in the same years.
The British Social Attitudes Survey is excellent. It's a very, very valuable resource for social scientists, including people like me who work outside of universities. It is just one data source, though. That's not a problem. It's just that, this is a complex data set that does require professionals to use it. And there are other things that are in it that perhaps aren't so easily come to light. For example, Christian affiliation, so people saying that they are Christian, has gone up a little bit. That seems contrary to the census. Now, this is not a problem for the BSA. Like, data wobbles happen. The BSA is an excellent data set, but we shouldn't just be using one data set to say another is good or bad. And to that, I would also kind of add that the BSA went through what's called a mode change in 2020. So they switched from doing in-person interviewing to web interviewing. Now, the sampling is still the same, but NatSen and BSA themselves caution comparing pre-2020 and post-2020 because of that methodology change. Now, that doesn't mean the BSA is not still very, very useful. It's still excellent for measuring these long-term trends. But our point is more that if we're going to play the methodology game, let's play it on all data sets that we're using, and let's use triangulation. Let's have a curious conversation about why these two interesting data sets could tell different stories. But it's not sufficient to me to just be like, well, the BSA is infallible and therefore we follow it, and this very good survey from YouGov must be therefore be wrong.
Another objection raised by David concerns the figures provided by church denominations themselves.
Yeah, so we have good data from the two largest denominations in England, which of course are Church of England and the Catholic Church, and then more partial data from the Methodist and Baptist churches, which are major denominations. So all of those show that attendance has dropped from the pre-pandemic level to roughly 20%, but the exact amount depends on exactly what measure you're looking at. Now, the Bible Society report asserts that the Church of England, in fact, hasn't benefited much from the growth that they're describing. So we could decide that we're not going to worry about the C of E statistics. And that's okay, but I just make the point that because the Church of England is such a big part of the religious scene in this country, if growth isn't happening there, it needs to be enormous elsewhere to generate the magnitude of the revival that they're being claimed, that they're claiming, that is, with attendance going up by more than half over this 6-year period. And indeed, according to their report, Catholic attendance more than doubled. But the Catholic Church itself counts people in the pews, and in 2019, they counted about 702,000 people attending Sunday Mass, and then that fell to about 550,000 in 2023. So that was a drop of about 21%.
What about churches that don't necessarily do that kind of counting? Is it possible that they could generate the kinds of numbers we're talking about to make sense of this data?
Yes, well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, in particular, could independent and Pentecostal churches be going great guns below the radar? If the Bible Society is right, though, we're looking for millions of new churchgoers. And they'd have to be very quiet indeed, and not to say invisible, to have escaped our notice.
So how does Rhiannon make sense of the difference of the figures between church counting and the Bible Society's quiet revival statistics?
I mean, firstly, they're doing different things. The church counting is looking at how many people turn up on average Sundays, or in the Church of England's case, they take a wider net. They try and collect what's called the worshipping community, which will pick up midweek attendance. Our data set just asks, how often do you go to church? We don't ask what kind of church you go to. We ask, what denomination do you most closely identify with? I'm comfortable with that, and it's what we asked in 2018. It's what we asked in 2024. But, I mean, for example, if you're an Anglo-Catholic, do you tick Church of England, or do you tick Catholic on my survey? I have met many people in the URC who say, I'm not really URC, I'd say I'm Church of England, but I like this church. People live messy lives, and they interpret surveys to the best of their abilities. Church counting is also not infallible. If I go to church on a Sunday morning and I'm there as a youth leader, am I in or am I out? Let's say I go then again for evensong. Are you remembering if I was there twice? Are you counting me as a worshipper in the first and not in the second? There are decisions that are made. Now, the trend data is good for both stats. We're not saying this is not useless data, but the gaps can be explained. And I guess I would counter the trend read on it as well, in the sense of both the Church of England and the Catholic Church are showing growth. Now, this might not be above 2018, which is what our data set would point to, but we are 5 years on from the pandemic now. I don't think that we can be saying with high confidence these are just people returning to church who would have been there before. And that's totally counter also to what churches on the ground are saying. They're saying they're seeing new people coming in. They haven't been to church previously. That's the bit I'm interested in. That is still growth. And that is the bit that Bible Society wants churches to kind of take seriously and respond to. I would also say that particularly the Church of England, and probably the Catholic Church as well, and maybe the church as a whole, we will still expect to see the number of churchgoers going down, because church-going, even with our data, is still something that older people do. And the new people coming in are not enough to offset that kind of age decline, if you like. So, yeah, the net picture is one thing, but what we're interested in are those new changes to the missional landscape. And I think our survey is excellent at picking that up, and it should only provoke curiosity, really. For the Catholic Church, like they're looking at weekly attendance over an average Sunday in September, October, I think. Well, our data might suggest that the Catholic fringe is much bigger. There's opportunity there, and that is what is really interesting to me. So let's use these data sets in dialogue and kind of take them as both giving different angles on the same phenomenon.
But David's concerns aren't just that the Bible Society data is at odds with other statistical measures. He's also sceptical of the way YouGov polling takes place.
The other main concern you have is with the nature of the YouGov survey. Now, YouGov, is a widely known, and as far as I'm aware, widely respected sort of surveying organisation. But you do have concerns, I think, over the way in which they survey compared to, say, a survey like the British Social Attitude Survey.
Yes, and the distinction is well understood by social scientists and is not controversial. Gold standard social surveys are based on random samples of the population. So everyone has a chance to be included. And the way that you get into the survey is somebody comes and asks you specifically to take part. So you're not a regular survey taker, but out of the blue, you get a letter and it's saying, please, would you be kind enough to complete this survey? And the British Social Attitude Survey is one example of that type. By contrast, people opt in to YouGov and their competitors' panels, and then they're rewarded after completing a certain number of surveys. So the risk of low quality or even bogus responses is considerable. Because these are essentially opt-in polls rather than random samples, one has to be very careful about the interpretation of the findings.
Well, that does lead me on to my next question, which is, given your concerns over this, should we be sort of very worried about, all of the other surveys that YouGov has been using? And for instance, the YouGov poll for Humanist UK claimed 75% of the country were in favour of assisted dying, which was very significant towards the assisted dying bill. But should we be sceptical of all of that kind of data, including from, humanist and secularist groups?
Absolutely. I'm skeptical of all data. I mean, that's part of what it is to be a scientist, I think. I'd say treat with caution and seek independent verification rather than just discount things. But I mean, to take the specific example that you mentioned, as it happens, the British Social Attitude Survey runs questions on assisted dying, and the 2024 survey shows that 79% are in favour. So the level seems about right. There are going to be a difference of a few percent, but I think in that instance, the YouGov and the BSA samples were not far out. There's an important point to make about survey research in general. We're typically interested in two things: levels and trends. So, for example, how many people call themselves Christian and go to church at least once a month? That was the key question that the Bible Society was trying to address for those years 2018 and 2024. So that's the levels question. And then on trends, how has that figure changed over the past 5 or 10 or 20 years? The problem is that if you take two surveys, both might be roughly correct, but the values will be approximate. So in trying to calculate trends, I'd be very wary of treating differences of just a few percentage points, particularly in opt-in polls, as a trend.
For their part, YouGov have responded to criticism, saying that their methodology is robust. And Rhiannon told me that she believes there's room for different survey formats.
David is right. The YouGov sample is the YouGov sample. So on the with the true random sample, like the British Social Attitude Survey, in theory, everyone has an equal chance, as long as they have a UK postcode, of being selected. People for my surveys can only be selected if they're on the YouGov panel. That is true. But the quality of that is what YouGov work extremely hard on, to make sure that that looks like the general population. And their real world outcomes do suggest that for the most part, they do manage to achieve it. Now, there are people missing on a YouGov panel. So people who might be of lower literacy, immigrants, the kind of people who might actually well be actively religious, are possibly more likely to not be on the YouGov panel. So I don't think that necessarily solves anything. Equally, if you take something like the British Social Attitude Survey, that mode change where they went from face-to-face interviewing to online, does that mean that they're less likely to pick up older adults? Does it mean that they're less likely to pick up people who might find written English harder? So yes, absolutely. I just don't think it's a knockout. They're just different methodologies doing different things.
David is sceptical about the validity of YouGov polls, but was more confident of their findings on assisted dying, as it roughly matched the British Social Attitude Survey. I asked Rhiannon for her response.
I think all you're saying there is you can only trust the BSA, which seems to me just really lacking in pragmatism. What if the BSA aren't covering that topic? Are we not to move things forward? I've got, for example, the majority of our work on the Quiet Revival Survey is actually about the Bible. Don't think the VSA have ever asked about the Bible. So we have to use other tools as well to further knowledge. And yes, triangulation, comparing them to excellent benchmarks like the BSA, is a really valuable thing to do. And I've got absolutely no concerns of people want to say, okay, I'm not going to trust anything by YouGov or Ipsos Mori or Survation, but just be consistent on it. Don't kind of take our survey as the one that is uniquely flawed. And I guess sort of my message to church leaders on this would just be, YouGov is used by people who are making far more influential decisions than Bible Society, and it is trusted for that, and their real world outcomes do suggest that trust is not misplaced. And it's okay to be critical. It's okay to be cautious. It's okay to say, actually, I'd rather look at the trend data that the YouGov stuff is looking at rather than the absolute numbers. That's a useful and critical way to approach data. Skepticism in itself is not a problem.
So what about David's concerns about making a trend out of a difference of just a few percentage points between 2018 and 2024?
If it was just the 8 to 12%, I don't think we would have written the report we've written, because the interesting thing to me is that age distribution. It's that U-shape that you can see in our chart on church attendance by age. That isn't just a stats wobble. That is something really different. And again, it's resonating with what we're hearing from churches. We were hearing it before we surveyed, that people were saying about young people coming in. And I was skeptical of that. I certainly didn't expect it to come through so strongly in the data set. But this isn't out of the blue. This is something that churches have been reporting for a while. And that's why we wanted to share it. It's not just a margin of error, a wobble, or a roughly right kind of trend line. And of course, the final picture might be that our 2018 data set was a bit cold. Our 2024 data set was a bit warm, or vice versa. But it is that U-shape that I think is the most interesting thing. And that is what we were particularly interested in sharing. And again, I think I would just encourage people to look at what we have claimed, which is not that this is the end of secularization or the start of a revival in which everyone's going to be Christian. It's an interesting moment in time. And I really think that is the benefit of doing this kind of research. So you've got excellent data sets like the census and the BSA that are tracking long-term change. Religious change takes a long time to emerge. But when you've got quicker turnaround data sets like this, you get to observe moments. And I don't know, 5 years' time, I might survey it again and it will look like 2018 again. But right now, we've got this moment and we want to act on it.
Having heard David Voas's objections to the data, I also wanted to ask him about the fact that Bible Society were not the only ones noting a trend back towards church and Christianity.
One of the responses from Bible Society has been to say that statistical evidence elsewhere seems to substantiate its claims. There appear to be other similar trends going on. So they might point to, for instance, data suggesting a real openness in terms of Gen Z spirituality. There was a survey earlier this year showing that Gen Z are sort of half as likely to be atheists as their parents or grandparents, effectively. There's been quite a significant rise in Bible sales, both in the UK and in America. There's various trends being reported in Europe and the USA around young men returning to church. And just across, in mainland Europe, France has been seeing record numbers of adult converts into the Catholic Church the last 2 years. Does any of that help to kind of, given it is very, these are very surprising results that you contend, obviously, from the Bible Society, but they say it does seem to be part of a trend elsewhere.
Yes. So there's a degree of circularity in the stories of revival, with a handful of articles being cited and recited. In my view, when you look at most of them carefully, they aren't very convincing. Now, if the two of us had an hour or more to sit down and have a nerd fest going through all of the evidence carefully, we might reach some kind of consensus. But we don't have that kind of time. I'll illustrate what I mean, though, with just a few examples. So you mentioned the Catholic church in France baptizing, it was somewhat in excess of 10,000 adults this year, which is an increase of a few thousand on recent years. And that received an enormous amount of publicity, not only in France, but elsewhere. If you look at infant baptisms in France, though, the annual number has dropped by hundreds of thousands in the past 2 decades. So to put that another way, each year, about 20,000 fewer parents than the year before have chosen not to baptize their babies. So the highly publicized return of a few thousand adults over a couple of years is completely dwarfed by the much less visible defection of tens of thousands of adults every year for decades. So there is something interesting happening there, but numerically speaking, it's not making a dent in decline. Well, what about the big boost in Bible sales that was reported by SPCK? So that's the largest Christian publisher in the country. The figures reported are total sales, and they're in a period of high inflation. But I think more importantly, SPCK wasn't publishing Bibles in recent decades until 2014. And since then, they brought out one new version after another. The growth in sales, to my mind, is, well, not just my mind's, in many people's view, is more likely to be the result of innovative product development and marketing rather than increasing religious interest. And yes, there's been a similar trend reported in the United States. There's a Wall Street Journal article on the phenomenon, and that actually quoted an expert comment. I'll read you the quote. The person said, "I'd like to say there's craving for knowledge of Scripture, but a lot of smart people are thinking about Bible marketing and catering to every whim for Bible study." So you have this rather interesting phenomenon of Bible publishers who are being very successful, but not actually taking credit themselves for being innovative and successful. They're attributing it to a rise in religiosity in the population.
Rhiannon McAleer takes a very different view to the corroborating data from other countries and institutions.
Well, I think that's the key point, really. Even if we hadn't released Quiet Revival, these data sets would have still been out there, and I think we would have been having a pretty similar conversation. There's other things as well. So Sweden, the rise in the number of 16 to 24-year-olds who believe in God is higher now than in 2010. It's not just down to immigration. Catholic Church in Ireland observing a bumpy year for baptisms. You've mentioned France, Spain as well, rising young adults identifying as Catholic with growth in religious orders. Within the UK, data sets do vary in quality, but Evangelical Alliance reporting a 13% rise in church attendance since 2020. Baptist Union, that church attendance has stabilized, but more importantly, they've got more young people, up by 16%. I could go on and on about the Catholic Church, who are reporting incredible growth in converts in nearly every diocese. I think Youth for Christ released similar data to ours on rise of belief in God, greater spiritual openness, shift in positivity towards the church among teenagers, and even in the Church of England. There is, evidence of growth in adult baptisms that they simply weren't seeing before. So there is loads. The Google Trend data and The Economist pulled out as well. So I guess the question is our data set in line with those? I think it's all pointing in the same direction, and that fundamental thing is a shift in the cultural atmosphere compared to where we were 15 years ago that makes Christianity more plausible, more appealing, and a generation who are looking for new ways of doing things. Now, that openness to God, which is coming through a lot, is not necessarily that they will become Christian. This is a wider spiritual marketplace, but some people are coming into the church. I met someone from the Greek Orthodox Church a few weeks ago who said typically have something like 30 people on their catechism course. They've got 500. I think I've heard David Voas argue, things like the Catholic stats, this is not enough to offset the decline in infant baptisms. And I think that's very similar to the main argument that the Quiet Revival report is making and observing, which is that we are seeing a reduction in that kind of cultural Christianity, where people were doing things by default, and a rise in the number of people who are opting in properly. Now, that shift might not be enough to offset the other shift, but both of those things can be true. And again, overwhelmingly, it's just backed up by what churches are seeing on the ground.
For his part, David Voas was happy to concede that not every piece of data points to decline in religiosity in Europe.
There is one place where there's evidence for an upswing amongst teenagers that I think is at least somewhat persuasive, and that's Finland. So there's a project there that has received a certain amount of attention. I know the Bible Society is aware of it because they mention Finland sometimes in their interviews. I'm actually one of the external advisors on that project. And although I'm continuing to act as a friendly critic, and I've expressed some doubts to the project leaders about what's going on, they have interesting and I think decent data from the confirmation camps that are very common in Finland, suggesting that teenage boys are more theistic now than in the recent past. So we'll follow that one with interest. But, I think that you can find some evidence somewhere that there's some of this going on.
But overall, if it wasn't already clear, David Voas is entirely unconvinced by the Quiet Revival data and didn't mince his words on the Bible Society.
The interpretation of their results, I think, unfortunately, is the product of wishful thinking. And that is very clear, given the complete absence in the report of any mention of contrary evidence, not simply the British Social Attitude Survey and Church Statistics, but even other YouGov surveys that tell a different story, or the World Values Survey, and so on. So I think that's a shame. If the Bible Society had simply said, we did these two surveys, the results are really surprising, but they're kind of interesting. Let us put them out there for what that's worth, and let's have a discussion over what they might mean. I wouldn't have a problem with that. What they did instead was to say, hallelujah, it's now beyond doubt, secularization has come to an end, we can see the hand of God at work. And that just, to me, suggests that they have left the scientific arena and they're simply engaged in this large exercise and what I think, sadly, is simply wishful thinking.
I asked Rhiannon how she responds to David's concerns about the Bible Society engaging in wishful thinking rather than a nuanced conversation.
Well, I mean, we are having a conversation about it. We've published the data and everyone's been talking about it ever since. So, I guess he doesn't like that we drew our own conclusions, but others are welcome to disagree with those conclusions, as indeed they have done. We've not stifled debate and open inquiry on it, but we've made our observations on our data set, and I think they're absolutely valid in terms of our wishful thinking. As I said earlier, nobody stands nowhere, and people like David Voas will often have their own kind of personal and professional lens on these things that are not neutral. David did a presentation for Humanists UK in 2023 called Why Humanism is the Future. He wrote a book called The Bad News Bible. We all bring our perspectives to data. But I don't believe the Quiet Revival has been received well because I said it or YouGov said it. It's received well because it resonated with what people were experiencing. And all I have heard back from churches is how do we make the most of what we're seeing? And that's what we want to be there as helpers in that.
So how are you hoping to build going forward on what has been quite a surprising and extraordinary year for you and your colleagues at Bible Society, but also I sense for the church as a whole? You recently joined us kindly at our Responding to the Rebirth conference. And again, there was a real sense in that room, the fact that conference sold out months ahead of time. What are your hopes for what the coming years will mean as we continue to see what this means for the church and so on?
I have two observations on that. I believe the moment is fast moving. You mentioned earlier that you were surprised to see it come through so quickly, but I agree. But I also do think that's a feature of our time. Like, we do, social trends, social movements do seem to be happening at a different speed than they were a few years ago. And I think there's probably various reasons for that, including the rise of social media, easier for people to connect, as well as kind of global volatility. So I think the moment is fast moving, and I think it's new. What I hear from church leaders, and I've heard a lot and had many conversations over the last 8 months, there are new features of this landscape that just weren't there in 2018 or 2017 when I started work in this area. So the rise in online discipleship, the algorithm serving up Christian content to non-Christians who are then intrigued and they keep consuming it, and then they find out that people who are interested in these ideas go to church. That seems very present in the idea of people just turning up. A spontaneity of a spiritual experience, if you like, as well as things like exploration of other spiritualities, that people come to church while they're also practicing Reiki and tarot, and might not be able to put those things down. So I think the moment is fast, and I think it's new. So my hope is that we can keep conversation going, that we allow space for all perspectives, and that we are learning with genuine curiosity about what works and what doesn't, because time will tell where our data set fit in and the nature of this moment. And it might well be we're on that trajectory to continuing secularization. That is entirely possible. My sadness would be, I really think there is enough data and evidence and feeling that this is a good moment, and it's a moment to act. And if we didn't act because we weren't sure, that would be a bad outcome. I love spreadsheets, I love stats, I love big trends, but we've got to get out there and really capture people's experiences, because there's something new going on. And Bible Society as a whole, we are going to continue to support Christians in deepening their Bible confidence and their Bible engagement, both here and around the world. And we are going to launch a campaign for spiritually curious and open people to come join with Christians in churches and explore the Bible in an open and curious way to meet the spiritual need that we are so clearly seeing, as are others.
My thanks to both David Voas and Rhiannon McAleer for the critiques and responses that they shared with me. If you want to find out more about the Quiet Revival and access the data for yourself, you can find the report and an FAQ page responding to questions at biblesociety.org.uk. I appreciate critics like Voas asking hard questions. It's important that Christians don't get swept away on a tide of hopeful enthusiasm. At the same time, despite Voas's reservations, I find myself convinced from my own experience and the many conversations I've had with church leaders that the Bible Society's findings do reflect something that is happening on the ground. Of course, surveys are always provisional, and I've no doubt that the startling findings of the Quiet Revival report will be nuanced by further data. But I'm glad that the Bible Society began this conversation the way they did. In the end, only time will tell where it leads. Hi friend, just want to read you this message that came in from Michael. He said, "This is a terrific series, intelligent and nuanced, and I write that as a non-Christian, though much interested in these topics. messages from people like Michael make my day, but it only happens thanks to people like Mel, Josh, Randy, Zachary and Janie, who have all become supporters in recent months. Your support helps make it possible for me to reach many more skeptics, seekers and believers with thinking faith. Plus, I throw in some perks. Silver monthly supporters get early access to episodes and bonus content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and the chance for a monthly catch-up. Help me continue to bring thinking faith to a searching world in 2026 by giving at the link with today's show or visit justinbrierley.com/support.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
This is the sound of an all-night prayer gathering at St. Church in Hackney, London. Some 1,500 young people have been packing into the regular overnight gatherings, with more in an overflow venue. The rector, Al Gordon, spoke at our Responding to the Rebirth conference about the influx of conversions and baptisms they've been seeing among Gen Z, whose testimonies often feature during the all-night prayer vigils. People like George.
So that was last August. Like 9 months ago. What difference has Jesus made to your life since then?
Oh man, living in the light is so good. Just changed my whole life. Complete 180 spin. I'm living in the light. He's changed my life, and getting baptized next weekend.
James Marriott is a young columnist for the Times newspaper who occasionally finds himself walking past St. Church. Hearing the vibrant worship services and seeing the queues of young people waiting to get in, he decided to investigate claims of a turn towards Christian faith among Gen Z. As well as the band-led charismatic style of Saint, the journalist was also aware of many young people gravitating towards a very traditional form of worship at St. Bartholomew the Great, London's oldest church. It led James, an agnostic atheist himself, to write a viral essay in the Times over the summer titled Full Fat Faith, the Young Christian Converts Filling Our Churches. I sat down to talk with James Marriott alongside Christian podcaster Elizabeth Oldfield and began by asking James about his experience visiting churches to research his article.
Whether or not there is a quiet revival, and I kind of go backwards and forwards on how much this is under or overstated. I went to a number of churches where there were a lot of young people who were extremely fervent, and religious fervour is just not something that I had particularly encountered before, and was at least sociologically fascinating to me. It was Marcus Walker's church, St. Bartholomew the Great, I found particularly interesting because it was so kind of, you're kind of used to such a sort of, there's a stereotype of Anglicanism that it's quite lukewarm and everyone just sort of sits there and mumbles the hymns. But people were really into it. Okay. And people were kneeling and praying with their hands clasped together. People were really singing the hymns. My impression of that church was that a lot of this was a kind of, people had found it through the internet, and people had perhaps found Christianity through the internet, and young people had turned up and were there because they really wanted to be there, not out of duty.
And
Which
it's
I think,
worth saying this is a very traditional Catholic liturgy.
Yeah, and that was also interesting about it because you can. I guess I also went to what I would call. Maybe this is, I don't know if this is offensive to call it a happy clappy church.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Which sort of met a lot of my stereotypes of what a happy clappy church is. And I sort of awkwardly stood not waving my hands while other people waved their hands. And it sort of, religious fervour made more sense to me in that context.
But it's just curious to see it in the environment of a traditional church.
You'd say that both of them represent a type of fervour, the evangelical charismatic sort of type and the very liturgical, sacramental. But
yes, exactly. And you really felt, and it was an interesting emotion that I realised I was never particularly exposed to in my normal, unfervent, moderate secular existence. And that was an extremely interesting thing to see. And I guess it made me realise, and I'm not sure that there's a universal impulse in people, because I don't think I feel particularly fervent, and I don't think a lot of people I know feel particularly fervent. But I think there is at least a subset of people, of humanity, of the species, who will always have this sort of need for religious fervour that secular society has not satisfied. And it was just interesting to go and see people who had found this experience. It was very alien to me.
It was obviously alien to you. Did you sense that this, did in the people you spoke to and the vibes you were picking up, that this was a sort of a new thing? Is it just you hadn't noticed it before? Or do you sense, there's something happening among young people looking for this kind of expression of faith in ways they perhaps weren't when you were, their age, or I was their age?
It's extremely hard to tell, because if you go to a church and ask about a church, everyone is quite eager to tell you there's a quiet revival. Everyone's going back to church. The numbers are up. And I think as a journalist, one has to approach this with some skepticism. I do think something is going on. And I think especially, I was very interested to talk to people who discovered Christianity through the internet and had looked for it. And I think either for cultural reasons or for reasons of meaning and purpose, they had landed on this thing and they had not grown up religious at all. A lot of the people I spoke to and had ended up in church, which was extremely interesting, would certainly not have been the case when I was in my teens. And I mean, I was probably in a bit of a new atheist bubble, spending my days in the forum of richarddawkins.com, agreeing with all the other members of the forum about how God definitely didn't exist, and in a somewhat smug atmosphere. But I think it was forgivable in a 14-year-old. I think that would have been outrageous and bizarre when I was in my teens. And I suspect, even if it's not widespread and even if it's a small minority of people, a lot of the cultural sort of embarrassment and cringiness around religion has disappeared for a variety of reasons. Whether that translates into like a quiet revival or
still
statistically measurable religious movement, I'm sort of somewhat skeptical, but at least interested in the cultural change.
You do sense a sort of cultural shift in that age group, whereas the natural place perhaps where you would have gone is the new atheists. There seems to be more of an openness to spirituality, to kind of finding meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
Religious expression.
I mean, Richard Dawkins was my god when I was 14, but and I'd have viewed church as very embarrassing, but that doesn't exist. And clearly some people have moved in that direction, whether or not it's like statistically significant. I don't want to I want to be a humble humanities graduate and not start throwing around sociological assertions.
I'm sure you read that article by James. What did you think of it? And does it sort of make sense in terms of anything you're seeing, Elizabeth?
Very much so, yes. Similar to James and similar to, as you've said, like there is a slight wait and see required. We are seeing things beginning to show in the data, but they are beginning to show. Like it might be a blip. Who knows? And I think what we can fairly confidently say is there is a widespread sense of appetite for something else, right? Something deeper, more meaningfulness, but also more ways to connect with other people and feel part of something bigger than ourselves. And that's showing up in all kinds of places, right? I think that's part of what's driving this intensely hyper-politicized moment that many people are kind of putting in their political identity, really strong sense of identity, and seeing it as a place to belong and a place for their life to have meaning in a way that, like, in my generation, like Gen X above me and like the top end of millennials, like the idea that you would be super into anything was a bit embarrassing, right? It was just like, let's just like raise an eyebrow at the world, and apathy was to be admired, and that has gone, right? The sense of that as in any way existentially satisfying has rightly, like, it's been seen for what it was, which is a lie.
Okay.
Frankly. And it's driving this very strong increased interest in like what is often kind of termed new age forms of spirituality, tarot, astrology, as well as driving some people to consider church for the first time. So I think we need to kind of put what I believe is like, I have heard enough anecdotal stories now from people who I trust to believe something is really happening, like baptisms are up, more people are walking into church, but that's not happening in an isolated way. And people are looking in lots and lots of different places for a sense of meaning and belonging.
James Marriott and Elizabeth Oldfield. By the way, you'll be able to hear the full conversation between James and Elizabeth on a new show, Uncommon Ground, launching in the new year, and I'll be sharing more info about it at the end of today's show. We've already heard the case for and against whether data supports the concept of a Gen Z revival in the UK. What seems undeniable is that more and more people, including agnostic journalists like James Marriott and podcasters like Elizabeth Oldfield, are bumping into a search for meaning and identity among young people, which is, for some at least, turning them towards Christianity. Likewise, across the pond in the USA, there have been plenty of people talking about a Gen Z revival there.
From what I can tell, revival is brewing among Gen Z. Like the revival you hear about in the history books, Christian revival.
I would just say there's been a mass herd of people who are making the public declaration to yield their life to Christ.
If you look for it, you see signs of it everywhere. Articles are reporting record numbers.
I've been hearing this a lot from Christian leaders in the USA. In the wake of the Asbury Awakening in 2023, and perhaps influenced by the Charlie Kirk moment this year too, stories abound of revival meetings, conversion and baptisms on campuses and growth in churches. So is a Gen Z revival also underway in the USA? Well, again, in the spirit of wanting to hear both sides of the story, I decided to interview a critic of such claims. Ryan Burge is a church statistician who says that while there are interesting changes afoot among Gen Z, it's not yet showing up in a revival of numbers in church. As it stands, overall church attendance has been in long-term decline in the USA, and the nuns, those who claim no religious affiliation, have been on the rise.
Between 1972 and 1991, they went from 5% to 6% of the population. So basically no substantive increase in about 2 decades. But from that point forward, the nuns went on this exponential rise. They've gone from 6% of America in 1991 to about 28% of American today. Amongst Generation Z, it's between 40 and 45% of them claim no religious affiliation. Today in America, about 40% of people say they never attend religious services. So, we've seen this dramatic increase in the share of people who have walked away from religion over the last 50 years.
However, Burge told me that the data is showing a leveling off. The nuns are no longer growing in the USA.
Well, what we know is that every successive generation is less religious than the prior generation. And we know that going back all the way to the silent generation, which are people born in the mid-1920s. So the silents are more religious than the greatest, and the greatest are more religious than the boomers, and you go all the way down the list. Now, what's really interesting, and this is something that I wrote about last week that I think is really going to change, it's changing how I think about this, is that the rise of the nuns is slowing among the youngest adult Americans. Okay, so if you look at someone today who's 63 years old, about 27% of them are nuns. Okay, you look at someone who's 43 years old, about 40% of them are nuns. So you're talking a 13-point jump in 20 years of birth, okay, from 63 to 43. But if you go from 43 to 23, the share of the nuns rises from 40% to only 45%. So it went up 13 points in the previous 20 years, but only 5 points in the last 20 years. So what we know is that there's a ceiling there. And we're not going to see Gen Z get to the point where it's 55 or 60% nuns. I just don't think there's any way in the world where that happens. They might rise from low 40s to high 40s, but I would even be surprised if they get far above 50% in America. So that really changes like how we think about the trajectory of religion, let's say in 2060 or 2070. It's not going to be 60, 70% nuns. There's just no evidence of that in the data.
So where does this leave church attendance? Burge says that while there are pockets of growth among non-denominational evangelical and Pentecostal denominations in the USA, the overall picture of generational decline in mainline denominations means the trajectory will continue downwards. Barring a miracle, Burge says that whatever's happening among Gen Z, it's not enough to offset the overall decline. While there are plenty of good news stories out there, the actual statistics about Gen Z only point in one direction.
Gen Z is the least likely age group to go to church. They're the highest rate of never attenders. They're the least likely to believe in God without a doubt. Now, I will say this, on affiliation measures, there's some consistency on this, in that, you know, people born in the 1990s and 2000s are about as likely to say they're non-religious as each other. So someone born in 1991 and 2005 is probably just as likely to be non-religious, around 44%. But again, that is not revival. That is just not, the number's not going up anymore. And that's just one metric. I would say attendance is probably a better, if you want to talk about revival, I think attendance is probably the metric you would want to look at. And that metric is absolutely crystal clear. Generation Z is the least likely to go to church of any generation we've ever seen.
So, another dash of cold water to us incorrigible optimists. According to Burge, it's certainly way too early to be talking about a Gen Z revival in the USA when faced with the cold, hard data. Yet I also run into plenty of American pastors on the ground talking about an uptick. But maybe this is where my own selection bias creeps in and where my optimism comes from. I'm mainly connected with US church leaders in those non-denom and Pentecostal streams where there is growth happening. And for many of them, it does feel like the undisputed openness among Gen Z is leading to an influx. Rich Villadas, lead pastor of New Life Fellowship in Queens, New York, told me he has encountered a real change in recent years.
New York is a very large place, and so to talk about faith is to talk about multiple expressions of that. However, within the Christian faith, here's what I'm seeing. Here's some of the trends I'm seeing. I'm seeing in a post-pandemic world so many young adults coming to faith in Jesus. Yesterday, I met so many people one-on-one as I was having conversation, and so many of them were 20-something-year-olds that have just started coming to church. And here's what was fascinating about that as well. Many of them brought a friend who was new to faith. And so I think that what I'm seeing in New York, and not just in Queens, where I pastor, but in Manhattan and in places in Brooklyn, there's a resurgence or a surge of young adult energy for matters of Christian faith. And they are invitational as well. So these new Christians are inviting their friends. And so it's just been a hunger, a sense of openness, a curiosity to matters of faith that we're seeing in New York. Lots of folks look at New York from around the country and go, oh, that crazy place, that's where you don't want to go. You're going to lose your faith if you come there. And I'm thinking, no. As someone who's born and raised here, there's lots of wonderful things happening in New York City, and we're seeing lots of hunger, especially from the younger generation.
And so presumably you're seeing something that feels different to what you have seen previously in your 13 years pastoring at that church. So what's changed, do you think?
Two things, I think. I think number one, at least to New York, my neighborhood in Queens was the global epicenter of the pandemic. And so I think the level of anxiety, despair, isolation, disconnection, I think it brought people to a particular emotional and spiritual state that they were not happy with. And so when things began to open up again, so in our case here, 2023 is when things started stabilizing again in New York City. 2024 and 2025 have been now, we are accelerating in some significant ways. And so I think it's been a hunger on one level existentially, where people have come across a level of pain and death and hurt, but not just existentially, I think from a sake of just a human connection. There is a longing and a desire for people to be part of something bigger than themselves in close proximity to others. And so from the emotional, spiritual, and relational kind of reasons, I think these are why we're seeing this surge of young adult energy and activity. And what we're seeing is, in our context as well, not just individuals coming to church, but communities being formed of connection. We've had small groups and community life over the years, but we're seeing an acceleration of that. And I think part of that is, in a post-pandemic world, the anxiety, the disconnection, the isolation, the loneliness. People are longing for some deeper meaning as well as for human connection.
You can hear the full conversation with Rich Villadas on the latest season of the Re-Enchanting podcast. And I think the New York pastor nails the reasons why Gen Z are primed for church. Even if they aren't yet attending in great numbers across the board, nevertheless, their search for stability in the wake of a pandemic and their pursuit of spirituality in the wake of a tech-driven meaning crisis is creating a missional moment for the church. Peter Dray, author of the IFES report, Gen Z Insights for Global Student Ministry, says that this generation's wide mix of cultural, personal, and political concerns can all be engaged by a church that points them to the unique identity found in Jesus Christ.
If churches can serve Gen Z well, the conditions are absolutely right and ripe for spiritual engagement. I think, amongst the right wingers, some of those are looking first and foremost to the church and to the Bible for answers, not always to Jesus. In fact, as one lad here at church, he's much more open to the institution of the church and to the Bible than he is to the person of Jesus. So there are some challenges there. Aside from that right wing group, I think we need to be aware that others who come to church may be coming to church, but at the same time, they may be manifesting, they may be exploring crystals, they may be looking to Eastern forms of spirituality. So I really do think that we need to speak and live in a way that demonstrates the uniqueness of Jesus, in a way that it can not just be heard, but also seen, including in the way that we relate to each other. It is going to be, I think, deeply entwined with their search for well-being and healing as well. So Christianity has genuine hope here again, but we must show that Jesus offers more than just therapy. Yes, he's the best therapy, knowing him, but he's more than just therapy. And my slight worry is that we might just see a more polarized landscape of passionate converts to Christianity from Gen Z, against those perhaps with other religious or cultural heritages. There's some evidence here that Gen Z Muslims and Hindus hold their identity more strongly than their grandparents, which again I think is an expression of kind of post-liberalism in Europe. And so could that lead to a greater polarization? I think it could. Could that have a political dimension, which is challenging for the church to navigate? I think it could. At the same time, I'm cautiously optimistic. And I do think that some of these young leaders who are coming through will be able to help the church not just to reach their peers, but actually to think more intelligently and more engagingly about what it means to reach post-Christian nations here in the UK, elsewhere in Europe, and in North America as well.
So we finish where we began. The political dimension of the rebirth is hard to escape. In my own country, some of those who marched with Tommy Robinson in the summer, with Union flags and crosses held aloft, also turned out for a carol service he recently organised in central London, an event that organisers said was about putting Christ back into Christmas, but which their critics claimed was about galvanising anti-immigration rhetoric, a charge which seemed to be supported by campaign emails sent by Robinson himself ahead of the event. I'll tell you what actually happened at the carol service shortly. But the reality is, Christianity can be co-opted by both the left and the right. It's my view that too many churches on the liberal end of the spectrum have become so highly politicised around progressive causes, with culture war flags of their own in place of the cross, that they can easily run the danger of sounding more like a political mouthpiece than the Jesus who transcends the culture wars. Nevertheless, in this moment, it's the fusion of Christianity and right-wing voices in both the UK and the USA that's increasingly come to mainstream press attention, from newspaper and BBC articles to popular YouTubers such as Tom Nicholas, whose recent video essay on the second coming of the religious right has been racking up views.
Two recent events which took place this December, one on either side of the Atlantic, demonstrated the potential of this conservative turn to God. The first was the Unite the Kingdom rally, London's largest far-right rally in decades and decades. In a manner which is actually quite rare for the British far-right, Christianity was inescapable.
With every culture, or more or less every culture, a religion is attached to it. With our British culture, it's Christianity. We are a Christian country.
They have attacked the family, they've attacked Christianity, they've opened the borders.
What a lot of the woke stuff is, it's actually super racist, it's super sexist, and it's it's anti-religion, but only anti-Christian. Like, why only anti-Christian? That's unfair.
A week later came Charlie Kirk's memorial service in Glendale, Arizona. With a lineup dominated by members of the Trump administration, this was perhaps the clearest template yet of how this Christian nationalist fervour might integrate with state power.
We will defend this world. We will defend goodness. We will defend light. We will defend virtue. You cannot terrify us. You cannot frighten us. You cannot threaten us. Because we are on the side of goodness, we are on the side of God.
So I guess I would just say this gathering and God's presence, God's very obvious presence in this room, the presence of Jesus, is a reminder of what we've known for 2,000 years, which is any attempt to extinguish the light causes it to burn brighter. Every single time.
This is like an old-time revival, isn't it? An old-time revival.
At both events, Christianity, or at least Christianism, was invoked as a source of internal political energy.
In his video, Nicholas takes an entirely sceptical approach to data suggesting a church-going upturn. I disagree with his analysis on that front. However, I agreed with much of the critique that the vlogger directs at the co-opting of Christianity for a right-wing political agenda. I've expressed the same concerns myself in this series. However, his video essay tends to equate both Danny Kruger and Tommy Robinson as Christian nationalists, whereas I think there's a big difference between the two. Firstly, there's their politics. One is a politician on the right who runs an ex-offenders charity. The other is a far-right activist with a history of criminal violence and fraud. The other difference is in the Christianity they represent. It's what Bishop Graham Tomlin has described as thick and thin religion. Writing for the Seen and Unseen website, he says, "Thin religion is simply a badge of identity. It often blends religion, politics, and nationalism and serves as a motivation to unite people around a cause, such as Hindu nationalism, Muslim victimhood, or Christian supremacy. It is religion seen purely as a label, a badge of tribal identity over against other religious identities. Tommy Robinson's faith seems as good an example of this as any. Thick religion, however, is different. It is not just a badge of identity, but entails a set of distinct beliefs and practices. It means submitting yourselves to the disciplines of the faith. In the Christian context, it is a belief in God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died for the sins of the world, rose again on the third day, and will return one day to judge the living and the dead. It involves a serious attempt to live the Christian life, to love your neighbor and even your enemy, helping the poor and vulnerable, praying regularly, being consistently present at Christian worship, and so on. Bishop Tomlin concludes, "If some shout loudly about Christian values, about the danger of losing the heritage of our civilization, and yet show no interest in going to church, living the Christian life, praying, or even trying to love their enemies, then we should take what they say with a large pinch of salt. They have no skin in the game." In my view, Danny Kruger believes in a thick version of Christianity, one which he believes has and should continue to shape the nation for the better. My fear is that Tommy Robinson and many of his followers seem to believe in a recently acquired thinner version of Christianity, used to attack those who do not share their vision of national identity. But thin Christianity of this nationalist sort is a hollow shell of the real thing, and will soon be exposed as such when co-opted for purely political ends, which is why even a YouTuber like Tom Nicholas believes it just won't work.
What makes this particular political moment unique is that high-ranking conservatives clearly want to do more than simply co-opt the iconography of Christianity. They want to use actual faith and theology to recharge and sustain their movement. The challenge is that too many of those who they see as potential converts don't really have much interest in the actual substance of the faith, which questions how sustainable any of this is. Maybe Joe Rogan finds God. But if he or any of his listeners are only really popping their heads into church because it's currently on trend for conservatives to do so, it seems unlikely that they're still going to be going in 6 months' time. Others might quickly find that, while they do occupy that slightly woollier end of the Christian nationalist spectrum in which Christianity holds some cultural importance to them, they actually do think that the likes of Doug Wilson or whoever else are pretty nuts. It's easy to view the current collision of Christianity and conservatism across the West as a sign of a political movement at the height of its powers, which is finally able to enact its deepest desires. But there's every chance that what we're actually seeing is a movement which is stalling, playing the greatest hits, and which is about to find out that the deafening chorus that they think is singing along with them is really just in their heads.
There are plenty of hot takes emerging on YouTube and elsewhere as politics, religion, and this rebirth moment all collide. But given where we are with polarised politics playing into a burgeoning meaning crisis and search for identity, what does the future hold for a church that wants to respond faithfully to this cultural moment that it's being presented with? I can't think of anyone better to speak into that question than Australian church leader Mark Sayers, whose writing and shows such as This Cultural Moment and the Rebuilders podcast read the signs of what's happening at a big picture level and help Christians to greet it with a non-anxious and grace-filled response. So I got him on a call from his home in Melbourne, Australia, to talk it out.
You've sort of been charting over the last year or so some of these aspects of reawakening that I've been kind of pointing out and others have been. But it is a mixed picture. A recent episode of Rebuilders was titled Revival and the Right Would Turn. So what have you been noticing on that front in particular?
Yeah, I think we sort of named something that's been fascinating, the response to that, which is so many people saying, you named something I was sensing or uncomfortable with, which is, the idea that there is awakening and revival. We see it in scripture. And, I remember reading Martin Lloyd-Jones' book on revival and just praying for that. But then sort of revival in certain places starting to come or evidence of that, particularly people from outside the church coming inwards, interest in God, people coming to faith. But then also at just times that seemingly being intertwined with a particular political agenda. And, and in recent times, that's been with a lot of people, that's been aligned with, this swing to the right. Does revival look exactly the same as current modes of political conservatism? And I think part of that too came to a real sort of sharp point with, the killing of Charlie Kirk. And there was just a lot of people sort of offline having conversations. I could just see hang on, what's going on here? And people who'd watched his memorial service and so on. But I think it was happening before then as well, So the question of, why are people interested in faith? Is it, are they coming because they're looking for a sense of order in the world? You know what I mean? A sense of structure. Are they also coming because it's the most countercultural thing you can do? It's almost like a new rebellion. And look, there's many people who have come for perhaps the wrong reasons and have ended up in beautiful relationships with Jesus. But I just think it's worth asking those questions. The gospel, it calls everything to account. It calls everything to repentance, and in a sense, the kingdom will read the earthly kingdoms as well.
So I just think it was, the question, I had someone who, wrote a message recently of someone who'd come back to church because of this stuff, and they had a relative, and then they talked to the relative about Jesus, and their relative had left the church because they saw their church as becoming sort of quite to the extremes of the right. And, I think part of this is what's happened is awakening or revival, whatever you want to call it, I tend to use the word renewal, has happened in the midst of, particularly in the US, a politically polarized world that goes out through social media. Europe has those dynamics. So like so many other things, this is happening in the midst of a highly contested political space. My first experience with this had a young guy turn up who's one of the early adopters of this, on the internet a lot, had no background in faith, came in. And what shocked me, I had to go, okay, I got to pivot here, was everyone turning up to that point was, because Melbourne's quite a progressive city, I'm just presuming everyone's super secular and progressive. And then all of a sudden the questions he would ask me were like, whoa, this is really conservative, really conservative stuff. And so I had to pivot there. But I think it's the same principle, we have to do, I've always been a believer in missiology, which is the science of mission, there's people like Leslie Newbigin who asked that question about Western society. So, how does the gospel, how do we re-go? What's part of my Western context? And, what's actually of the gospel? And that's much more dynamic now. It can change in 2 years. There's so much more of a fluid culture. So I think, the answer is discipling people well. And, where they're reading the scriptures more in community than they are just in online, short form content. Not what's helpful in the culture, what's not helpful, what's neutral. These are the classic questions that missiology asks. So I think that's really applicable these days.
I think there is a harvest to be had, and I just wonder where do you see, if you like, the positive spiritual harvest here? What's leading people, however it's kind of ending up being expressed sometimes in wonky ways. What's leading for you this renewed interest in faith?
I remember, I think it was maybe 2015, 2014. I was in downtown Melbourne and I was leaving a football match and it was just packed. And I walked through the city and there was major concerts on. There was a rugby match as well. It was just restaurants bustling, lights. Melbourne was the world's most liberal city at that moment. And I remember my heart just sort of dropping. On one way, it's I'm so glad I live in this city. But the other side was how do I compete with this? How does the gospel compete? How does a minister, do I convince people that there's more? You don't have to make that argument now. I read all different newspapers from across the world. It's rare to get a report things are great. There is just a sense in the next generation. I remember my daughter, my daughter's Gen Z. And I remember one day I said to her, what's the difference between you and millennials? And she said, millennials are wanting to have a great life. We just want the world to still be around when we're 30. I was like, wow, okay, that's, really different view of life. And so I think we've got a generation coming up who the secular seductive story or gospel, let's call it the gospel of secularism, just does not ring true. There's still some pushing into it. There's still, there's renewal moments within the gospel of secularism. But I think that people are looking for other things. And it's not just Christianity. The cults is growing. There's drugs. There's politics is also a religion that people are looking for. That's part of what this is. But I think it's a lot. You don't have to convince people of the emptiness of materialist secularism now. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And again, I think that's only going to increase. I hate to say it. I wish I could say the culture's going to get better. I think there's more challenges to come. And I don't think we've had the big economic shock that could come, or, if there was a war in the China Straits, it could get much more intense, And I always remembered there was this stat that for 3 weeks after September 11th in Australia, church attendance went up, which I've always just found fascinating. Australia wasn't hit by September 11th. It's on the other side of the world, but the sense of safety that people had was popped. And that's what's happening now. And I think that's only going to increase in the future.
With all the kind of the mixture of politics and culture and everything that's going on, what should the posture, do you think, of the church be as it seeks to faithfully meet, meaning seekers, people who are perhaps feeling afraid and uncertain in the world today?
Churches need to switch on to a new evangelistic reality, which is that people all around you are more interested than you realize. I feel like almost, particularly churches in the secular West are so conditioned by secularism that we think people are not going to be interested, but there's tremendous openness out there. So I think that it's going to increase. But also to, what are they going to find? Are they going to find a vibrant Christian community? And I even feel in Australia, people haven't made that connection. There is an increased opening out there. It's not in the media, but it is when you talk to people. And I think a lot of churches are sort of like, oh, we're declining, or this generation is declining, or we're just sort of holding on. So I think there needs to be, or what are they going to find communities shaped by the gospel, living for Jesus, where people feel the presence of God? It's interesting, there was some research done in Australia, and the churches that people are turning up to, it's a church where the people feel that this Holy Spirit, maybe a charismatic service, but it's also so like masses where they feel like in the Eucharist there's the presence of God. So it's like they're turning up to actually meet the person of Jesus. So will they find that there and continue to live into that and have people who are able to disciple them through these tricky things, politics, people who have lived lives which aren't culturally Christian. I think that and already seeing, I think it'll bring a fresh new group of people in, to the church. So I think that's really important. But I also think that the church increasingly will become one of the rarest places you can find where there still is human community. I think that, people are increasingly getting atomized. I think that's only going to increase, particularly with artificial intelligence, very possibly. And so the boring stuff of, people putting out casseroles after church and actually having conversations, which seem so uncool, will increasingly become culturally radical. That you can come in and chat to someone, or even, a 15-year-old can chat to an 85-year-old.
Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay. Your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, a holiday you're saving.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. This season, enjoy spacious, comfortable rooms and friendly service when you book with Hilton instead. Hilton for the stay.
Here's to quitting. Quitting the couch for a quick run. Quitting the snooze button for a morning workout. Quitting giving up after 2 weeks. You see, staying committed to your fitness goals isn't easy. But with Apple Watch, you don't have to do it alone. Because Apple Watch gives you real-time motivation, plus advanced metrics that track all your workouts, so you can stick to your New Year's fitness resolutions. And once and for all, quit quitting with Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required.
This is Jason Momoa, and I'll be your finance professor today. Welcome to Banking Smarter 101 with Chime. Bam! First lesson, sign up for Chime and set up direct deposit. You'll be joining millions of members banking fee-free. Second lesson, get cash back on eligible purchases while building credit and a higher APY on your savings. That's how you bank smarter this season. Fa-la-la-la-la, class dismissed. Join Chime today.
Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and a secure Chime Visa credit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. Members FDIC. Optional services and products may have fees or charges. Details at chime.com/fees-info. With a qualifying direct deposit, earn 1.5% cash back on eligible secure Chime Visa credit card purchases. On-time payment history may have a positive impact on your credit score. Results may vary. APY means annual percentage yield. Learn about credit building and more at chime.com.
Today, in our final episode of Surprising Rebirth Season 2, we've covered a lot of ground. We've interrogated the data around claims of quiet revivals and Gen Z reawakening. My conclusion? It's a mixed picture, but something's happening. And we've returned to where we began in this season, the political vibe shift that's accompanying this rebirth moment. My conclusion? Again, it's a mixed picture, but something's happening. I've tried through both seasons of this podcast to present a balanced, journalistic account of what's happening. Of course, it's not a purely impartial account, and you may or may not agree with my personal assessment of the trajectory of this rebirth moment. Likewise, as Rhiannon McAleer reminded us earlier, there is no view from nowhere. We all bring our worldview to the data, and I've never hidden my own Christian faith in these documentary essays. And that's why, in these last few minutes, I'm laying down all objectivity to speak with my full fat faith Christian hat on, to say that whatever the specifics of where the data is pointing, and whatever the political complexities of this moment, I believe that God is working in and through this surprising rebirth phenomenon, even through characters and storylines we may not approve of. When Tommy Robinson's Christmas Carol event took place in Whitehall, London, opposite Downing Street, it had the potential for being just what its critics feared, a religious facade for a political rally. Many church leaders wrote articles ahead of the event critiquing the motives of Robinson and sharing the emails he had sent to supporters, encouraging them to use the service as a protest against London Mayor Sadiq Khan and, quote-unquote, unchecked immigration. But to the surprise of some critics who attended or watched online, with a more modest turnout than expected, the event passed off entirely peacefully. Alongside the carol singing, the main messaging from the front included a number of evangelistic calls to those present to accept Christ as Lord and Saviour. At the end of the event, Robinson himself shared some words that perhaps suggest he's turning towards a thicker version of faith.
I'll just say, when I started in 2009, the church stood against us. In every city we went into, as a cry for help at what was happening in our towns and cities, the church leaders stood and opposed us. That drove me away from Christianity. In fact, I hated the church for them betraying us. We, all of us, were their lost sheep. The way they've acted this week is the reason that churches are empty. Yes. But when I went to prison, I met a pastor, and betrayed by the church and away from Christianity, as I knew the Quran and I knew Islam, and I didn't know the Bible and I didn't know Christianity. But as I started understanding the Bible and the pastor done lessons with me for the life of Jesus, I understood that Jesus would have stood against the establishment. He would have stood with the sinner. He would have stood, and I'll be honest, I found it hard to even betray myself or say I'm a Christian, because I know I live a life of sin. But then I realised that Jesus stood with the sinners. So I've been on my own path, and you know, today, I've stood there and watched every second of this. It's been the most beautiful moment, standing there watching every minute of it. And moments like this bring me closer to faith. So I'd like to thank every one of you, because it's been beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I say, why? People say, why are we here today? We're here to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. And every one of us, including myself, need to ask what that means to us. What does it mean that Jesus lived for us, he died for us, he rose again?
In an article titled Generosity and Caution, the Reverend Dr. Helen Painter, whose work critiques Christian nationalism, said this: "An honest assessment of today's service must admit that, on the basis of what was said from the platform, Robinson's promise to be apolitical was, at least today, on this occasion, kept in good faith. Many of us who are parents will be familiar with the advice that, rather than telling a child, 'you're unkind,' we should comment instead on their behaviour. That was an unkind thing to do. Today's event challenged me to think similarly about Tommy Robinson and those who stand with him. Rather than blanket condemning them for the things they have said and done, perhaps we should comment on particular moments, particular actions. Tommy Robinson may have said some racist things in the past. He didn't today. We can say the one thing without unsaying the other. None of us is entirely monochrome, and growth and repentance is possible." Regarding Robinson's apparent conversion, Painter advises, "We need to await the evidence of fruit in accordance with Jesus' instructions. Entering the kingdom of God changes all our allegiances and challenges all our ideological commitments. We cannot simply carry on as before, but under a new badge." I agree with Helen Painter that we need to extend grace where possible, alongside caution. After all, Scripture itself advises us to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I don't know whether Tommy Robinson's conversion is genuine, but I know I want him to meet Jesus as much as anyone else. In the end, again, only time will tell. But the reality is, whoever we are, God only gets to work with flawed and broken people, including all our mixed up motives and wonky theology. That's why I, even as someone with deep concerns about the rise of Christian nationalism and far-right populism, also believe that the biggest mistake in this moment would be to dismiss everyone marching with St. George's cross flags in an anti-immigration rally as racists and deplorables. They are often people who feel themselves forgotten by the elites, fearful for their futures, and searching for meaning, purpose, and identity in the symbols and slogans of those marches. They too are image bearers of God, loved and cherished by Him just as much as is the Muslim immigrant that they may be marching in protest against. I don't believe Jesus would cancel either of them, so neither should we. And church at its best is a place where the immigrant and the nationalist will be surprised to find themselves sitting next to each other and find that they're both offered an identity in Christ that transcends national or ethnic lines. Because when you really encounter the counter-cultural, untamed Jesus of the Gospels, you'll be challenged to rethink your preconceptions wherever you sit on the social or political spectrum. So whatever happens in this moment of opportunity, let's not simply play into the polarized politics that already define our culture wars. Let's choose to do something different and instead sit down with those we wouldn't normally talk to. Let's find out what they believe and why. We may find in the process they are people who love, laugh and lie just as much as we do. Someone I may even be able to call my brother or sister in Christ, despite our deep differences. Most of all, let's not lose sight of the fact that politics, culture, and data aside, this is ultimately about individuals finding their way to God. So as we close out Season 2, as is our custom, I want to end this episode with a surprising rebirth story. But not of a celebrity convert, influencer, or a viral moment. This is the story of a very unassuming, everyday person. But it's a story that's close to home for me, because McAleer is part of my church.
I don't have enough words. I'll never live enough a lifetime.
McAleer is a South African in her early 20s and a gifted singer. In fact, this is her singing at her baptism service in June this past year.
All of my deceptions and all of my duplicity. Now there is no record. You assume the best of me, and this is why I thank the Lord for saving me. When I was
McAleer, do you believe and trust in one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit?
I do.
Do you repent of your sins, turn away from evil, and turn to Jesus Christ?
I do.
And do you confess Jesus Christ as your Saviour and your Lord?
I do.
McAleer, we baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So this is how I thank the Lord for saving me. When I was weak, so I will sing. This is how I thank the Lord.
McAleer was baptized on Pentecost Sunday, around 6 months after walking into our church for the first time. When she briefly shared her story of coming to faith on stage, it struck me as encapsulating so much of why Gen Z are finding their way back to church. I sat down with her to find out more, starting from her childhood. Although she wasn't raised in a church-going household, McAleer says there were some early Christian influences on her.
I had people around me who were Christian, so a lot of times, like my best friend of the time, she was Christian. So she'd go to church, and when I'd sleep over at her house, she would have her Bible in the morning and she'd open up and be reading it. And I was always like, okay, that's great, but I don't quite understand the point of it. And then my teacher would make us pray every morning and go around the room and allow us each to have a moment to pray. So I had people around me, so I had an idea of it, and my parents didn't fully cut me off because they used to go to church as well. So I had an idea from them as well. I had a little Bible storybook about Jesus that I used to read. And then soon later, when I moved overseas to the UK, because I'm from South Africa, it was around, I think, 2021 at the time, and I was just really struggling.
Like so many of Gen Z, it was the lockdown and the pressures of isolation and anxiety and a search for meaning that led McAleer to start following a variety of New Age spiritual influencers online.
Because it was 2019 when I came, and then COVID hit. So it was all of a sudden isolation. So I guess it was just the fact of having people around me for a short period of time and adjusting to the culture, but then having to all of a sudden be shut in my house and having for about a year, wasn't it? And then I just kind of, I guess, grew a bit anxious, and I was burning out because of schoolwork and like being 10 hours a day doing like English work. And I was just a bit overwhelmed. And then around 2021, I was still struggling with it, and I went, okay, my feed just started changing because I was getting into like watching tarot videos and believing like, oh, maybe crystals could help. Like I was really getting into that. There's like little clips that would say, pick a card, and then that, or which crystal do you feel you connect most with? And then it would just tell you things. And I don't know, I felt connected to that at the time. And I had friends in college who also believed in that. So I guess we all just like influenced each other in a way into believing that, which I guess at the time it felt like some sort of purpose for myself to fulfill me, but it didn't really. I was still anxious. I was still burnt out. It wasn't helping that much. And then my feed started changing on Instagram and TikTok. And I was like, oh, what's these videos? Because it was all Christian clips popping up.
Before she ever set foot in a physical church, it was a change in the algorithms on McAleer's social media feed that set her on a new trajectory.
One of those ones was like, don't skip, God's trying to tell you something. I was like, well, I know about Jesus. I know about God. Let me just listen to this. So I did, and my feed just kept, even my YouTube was changing to podcasts and sermons. I was just like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So I went to my gran and I was like, could I borrow your Bible? And then they allowed me to read it. So she was like, sure. So I took a Bible and I started reading it. And I felt this joy and this peace that I've never felt before. Like I would get irritated really easily, and I just wasn't getting irritated with things I used to. And it was just this overwhelming like peace and joy in my spirit. I was like, this is great. I've never felt this before in the past couple of years. So I just kept reading. I watched a bunch of podcasts, and it just grew from there. And then I thought, let me try church now, because my best friend at the time that I was saying was reading a Bible. She invited me to church at that time, and I went with her the one day. People there were just like, I didn't necessarily speak to people there, but I could feel in the environment that people were very like joyous and community with one another. And that night they were like, would you like to give your life to Christ? And I said yes, not knowing the meaning. But now that I'm in church, I finally understand what that meant. So it feels great as well to have community now.
Wonderful. You kind of eventually found your way to the doors of our church. And it was such a joy to see you baptized earlier this year, to see you give such a heartfelt testimony yourself and sing that wonderful song. What kind of led you to that point of wanting to be baptized? What was the kind of the journey to kind of make that kind of a public declaration?
I think for me it was more just because I've been starting to follow the faith for quite a while and starting to come to church and experience all of that. I knew of people who, you get baptized at some point. And I guess I just connected with the idea of being like, well, baptism, you're giving your life to Christ. You're declaring that I'm living for Christ and I love Christ and I'm going to continue to follow you as long as I live. So, and obviously after you live, because it's eternal life, isn't it? So I was like, you know what, I feel like this is the time. I know I've just started church and I started in January, but it feels right. Now I like to always remind myself of put others first, serve others, because it's representing the idea of Christ, and Christ is love. So how can I show love to others? I can serve them, and love comes with sacrifices. Love comes with being like, what can I give to you and how can I help you? So now instead of being like, oh, well, how can this help me? I try and first be like, how can I help others in the process of it as well as myself?
I asked McAleer how easy she found it to speak about her newfound faith to other young people of her generation.
I do have friends who are Christians, so of course with them I can openly talk about it. For me personally, I always like the idea of how I say you're planting the seed, right? But you don't have to go and speak about God to someone who isn't Christian for 10 minutes straight, because obviously at that point they're not going to listen to you, they're just going to zone you out. But you can just like, if I'm doing something and I'm talking to them and something good happens in my life, I'm like, oh, praise the Lord for that. That wouldn't have happened without him. Because you are implementing something into their mind, in their subconscious, even if they aren't in the forefront of their mind thinking about it. But I think it can be hard still in my generation to share your faith, especially if you feel nervous too, because I know for myself, I often do have this sense like, oh, I don't know if I should say something, even if I want to. So I think it's in that in-between stage, because there's graphs and things saying that the numbers are rising in Christians, but I think it's a matter of, even if there's that scarcity within yourself, to hold back about what you want to say, just say something small like praise the Lord. Like, I think the smallest thing can make the biggest difference, even if there's that because I think every generation is going to be a bit of a pullback from people, but as long as you're proud of your faith and you're putting it out there, I think it should be all right.
So what does McAleer feel the future may hold as she goes forward with Christ?
I would love for him to help me grow in who I am as a person, like I say, how I can serve others. And I guess because I'm going into music as well, I'm in my second year of university, and in your third year you have modules you can pick, and one of them is gospel. So I've sat in that class before for the 30s, and I thought that's quite cool to see how gospel singers go about it, because I would love to make music that is for everyone, of course, but also be an artist where I can show that I am Christian and I can talk about my faith proudly and be like, thank you to God for everything that I have, and just share my faith through music, sing it in a way where people who are Christian can listen to it, and people who aren't can also, but you're planting that seed there for people to be like, oh, what is this about? There's something about this music that connects with me. Oh, she's Christian, like, and it maybe help other people in that sense. But I think for such a large question, I would say my main thing is hopefully Jesus can just guide me wherever he wants me to take me, and I'll just follow where he takes me, honestly.
I asked McAleer if she could sum up what she has now that she didn't feel she had before becoming a Christian.
Peace. I would say peace and joy. Because obviously you do have your joy and everything beforehand, but I think I've never felt such an undescribable kind of peace where you can say to others that you feel calm and like at peace with things, but when you say to someone when you've been in a place where you're anxious, if you just say a Bible verse to yourself, how calm you can feel, and you can't say to someone, oh, this is why, you can't pinpoint it. So I think the biggest difference Christ has had in my life is that peace that he's given me, and having purpose, and a small purpose, large purposes of loving others, and just having something and someone to look to and everything. I think that is the biggest thing for me, is having someone to go to anything about and rely on him and say, this is my thoughts today, this is how I'm feeling. That you're just yapping the whole day. I think that I'd say that's my biggest difference.
Peace. That's the word McAleer used to sum up the difference that following Christ has made to her life. Peace in a turbulent world is what most people are looking for, Gen Z especially. And God is still in the business of surprising people, just like McAleer, with the fact that the answer to their search for peace and for meaning, purpose, and identity has a name: Jesus. You've been listening to the surprising rebirth of belief in God with me, Justin Brierley, continuing to tell the story of why many secular 21st century people are considering Christianity again. Please do share this episode with others. A rating and a review also helps others to discover the show. If you'd like to read this podcast, it's also a book, and I'll send you chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. I'll also send you the first chapter of my new book, Why I'm Still a Christian. Thank you for listening to this year's season of the show. I hope you found it helpful and encouraging. We've had almost 2 million downloads of the show since we began 2 years ago. And thanks as ever to Isaac Simmons for editing assistance, and to our show partners, Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Please do send me your thoughts on any and all of the shows from this season to feedback@think.faith. We plan to be back with another Surprising Rebirth season later in 2026, as well as a brand new video and podcast show, Uncommon Ground, recorded in the beautiful setting of Yarnton Manor, Oxford. Uncommon Ground will be a place where different worlds meet, a show where opposing views on God, atheism, faith, science, meaning, ethics, culture, and history all get tested.
I am quite sympathetic, I think, to the idea that we're living in an infinite multiverse.
Fine-tuning or information density, these are things we know from experience come from minds.
The Christian mythos is the most profound mythos that I have ever discovered anywhere in the world.
One thesis is that the thing that we lost is belief in Christianity. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not.
So why don't I reveal what the results are?
But this won't just be a show about the clash of ideas, it'll be a conversation in which both sides genuinely try to understand each other. And I'm so excited by the guests joining me for these conversations that matter. Our first season includes Richard Dawkins and Rowan Williams, Alex O'Connor and Glenn Scrivener, Elizabeth Oldfield and James Marriott, Stephen Meyer and Phil Halper, Jonathan Pajot and Joe Foley, Ian McGilchrist and Anil Seth, and Emily Qureshi-Hurst and Paul Davies. Sometimes they'll discover common ground.
That is exactly what I feel. Thank you very much for putting it much better than I could put it.
And sometimes they won't.
You could do this with anything, you know? You're mischaracterizing me there, quite substantially there.
You keep accusing me of interrupting you.
Let's.
Either way, you won't want to miss these captivating conversations between leading thinkers. Uncommon Ground, the brand new show from Think Faith. Look for it in 2026. And as ever, you can get early access when you support the show. And by the way, your support as we reach the end of 2025 is so valued. If you'd like to make a year-end gift to my work, bringing Thinking Faith to both the secular and Christian world, well, the links are as ever with today's show. For now, Happy New Year, and see you next time.
Don't chew on that, Max.
Cooper loves that chew too.
Oh, now he's into Cooper's food. Wow, he is loving it. What do you feed Cooper?
Blue Buffalo Life Protection Formula. He never leaves a crumb. I love it because it's made with high-quality protein, nutrient-rich fruits and veggies, and wholesome whole grains.
Looks like we're switching to Blue.
Blue Buffalo foods are made with the superior ingredients your dog needs to thrive. Can your dog food say that? Visit feedbluefood.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by... Oops! I've got a box of Cheez-It crackers staring at me, and I just wanted that irresistible cheesy crunch. Sorry, that was a total snacksident. What was I supposed to be talking about? So salty, so crunchy, so cheesy. Whoops! Lost my train of thought. I've heard of brain freeze, but brain cheese? I'll just have one more Cheez-It cracker, and then I'll get back to it.
Did you know that leaving a rating and a review on your podcast app helps others to discover this show? Thanks to Bickwiser, who described it as something rare and precious, providing spiritually crafted brain food and a spiritual uplift. Sharing an episode with others on social media also makes a huge difference. But the way you can make the biggest difference to this show is by supporting my work, either via Patreon from anywhere in the world or through US tax-deductible giving from the USA. Either option gets you the same perks. Become a silver supporter and you'll get early access to episodes plus exclusive bonus video content. Gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me on Zoom. And I get so much out of those catch-ups with supporters myself. I really love them. So to support, just go to the links with today's episode info.